Hello everyone and welcome to Introduction to Probability, Part 1. Let's get started. So today we're going to look about the historical timeline of probability, talk about how we measure it, say what it is, go over some basic vocabulary, talk about the types of probability, and say where it's used in real life. Here we go. So, in the history of math and the timeline, probability is less than 100 years old. It is second youngest only to statistics, which is about 200 years old. Now, this might seem like a long time, but algebra and geometry are several thousand years old and come from places, as we see in these pictures, which we know are very old. We measure probability and talk about its results using fractions, for example 2/3, a percentage like 20%, or a decimal like 0.45. And as I always say, remember, fractions are your friends. What is probability? Probability says how likely something will happen, how likely an event will happen, or how likely we will get a result. It has values from 0 being impossible, all the way up to 1 being certain or always happening. The first vocabulary, outcome. It's the result of something that happens. For example, flipping a coin could have an outcome of heads. An event is a set of one or more outcomes together. We use E for this set, or the name of the set. For example, an E could be 1, 4, which shows that the two outcomes we're interested in are 1 and 4 on the roll of the die, which is the singular of dice. Sample space is the set of all possible outcomes for a given situation. We use S for the name of this set. For example, a coin, or two coins, could have the possible combinations of 2 heads, 2 tails, or 1 head and 1 tail, which could come either with the heads being first on the first coin, or the heads being second on the second coin. The sample space for a die is the numbers 1 through 6. An unusual event has low probability of happening. Usually we use 5% for this, but the value we choose depends on the situation. For some things, 5% would be way too high. Like, for example, the probability of a plane crashing, 5% would be unacceptably high, and we'd have planes crashing every day. So we would need a probability lower than that to be considered unusual. Now there's 4 kinds of probability, so let's take a look at each of those briefly. The first is theoretical probability. This is done calculated using sets or ratios of items in sets, and it's a fraction of one thing over another often. For example, the probability of choosing a red triangle from this bag is 3/5, because there's 3 red triangles out of a total of 5 triangles. Experimental probability is calculated when we repeat an event over many times, often thousands of times. For example, the probability of a slot machine showing 3 sevens all the way across. A casino would be interested in experimental probability to make sure that the slot machine was working correctly. Simulation and simulated probabilities are the third type. This is where we use a computer to simulate events, running the computer many thousands of times in a similar way to experimental probability, which happens thousands of times. We use simulation in situations where it is too expensive, or it's not practical, or it's unethical to perform experimental probability. For example, exploding nuclear weapons, tests on humans or other animals, complicated social processes, predictions about the climate. All these are possibilities for using simulated probabilities. Subjective probabilities is the last kind. This is where a subject matter expert gives their opinion of the probability event. It's based on personal judgment. For example, a sports expert gives a probability rating that Barcelona will win the next World Cup. Where is probability used in real life? Well, it's used in places like insurance and calculating the likelihood of an insurance payment being made, investments and how successful or what the risk of the investment is, about product design and planning, like how much of a particular product we need or what size we need, and how many we think we can sell. Strategies in sports and games, things such as weather and climate, the control or flow of information or things such as traffic on the street or electrons in a computer chip, or the flow of information through a social media network or through a network of people in real life. It's also used in things like genetics and physics and some atomic particles. And finally, in things with weather and climate and predicting about outcomes that will happen there. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Now you know a little bit about basic probability. Stay tuned for the next video. Bye-bye.